Hello again, everyone. My name is Arak Kabar, here as always, seeking the truth. And in my video for today, I'll be addressing the so-called Pan-African or Black Conscious movement. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are turning away from the Bible and turning more towards things like Egyptology, Africanism, and the New Age movement. Now, before I get into this, I want to start by saying that all of these religions or belief systems have purely been created to get people out of the Bible, when in fact the Bible is the only book that explains certain things that these other religions cannot. It actually saddens me to say this, but the majority of complaints that I hear about the Bible typically come from so-called black people. Now, the top 4 comments that I usually hear are: the Bible is a white man's book, the Bible has been tampered with, so we can't take it literally, I'd rather believe in science, or African or Egyptian history predates the Bible, so that means all the stories in the Bible were just stolen or plagiarized from older stories that were in Africa. Now, I want to address all of these concerns in this video. So, first of all, the first one, the Bible is not a white man's book. Every major character in the Bible was a person of color. The Bible is primarily a book written by Israelites and for Israelites. And it is in fact the Israelites are dark-skinned people, but they are not the same as Egyptians or Africans. How can I prove this? I'm going to read from Acts chapter 21, verses 37 through 38. It reads, "And as Paul was led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art thou not that Egyptian, which before these days madest an uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderous?" So in this verse, we see that Paul was being mistaken for an Egyptian. Now, we all know that the Egyptians are black, or a very dark-skinned race of people. So in order for Paul to be mistaken for one of these people, it means that he too would have to have also had a very dark-skinned complexion. So what race or nationality was Paul actually? I'm going to read from Romans chapter 11, verse 1. It reads, "I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid. For I also am an Israelite, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin." So, Paul was from the tribe of Benjamin, which we know today are the modern day Jamaicans and people of the West Indies. So these people have a similar skin complexion to Egyptians, but that they are not considered African. More proof. I'm going to read from Acts chapter 13, verse 1. It reads, "Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lucius and Cyrene and Manan, which had been brought up with Herod and the Tetrarch and Saul." So in this verse, we see that Barnabas and Simeon were both called Niger, Niger. Now the word Niger in the Strong's Concordance is number G3526, and it means black. The descendants of the tribe of Simeon today are the modern day Jamaicans, and Barnabas was from the tribe of Levi, whose descendants today are the modern day Haitians. So back during biblical times, we see that it was common for Israelites to be called Niger. Now today, the modern translation for the exact same word is nigger. So the same people being called nigger today are the same people that were called nigger or Niger in the Bible. Now even Christ, who was from the tribe of Judah, which is today the modern day Negros in America, was described as a so-called black man. In Daniel chapter 10, verse 6, Christ is described as having his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass. Then again in Revelation chapter 1, verse 15, it describes him as having his feet unto like fine brass, as if they had been burnt in a furnace. Now I could go on, but my point is that the Bible is very clear that it is not a white man's book, and the majority of the characters described are black. So if anything, this would be a black man's book and not a white man's book. All right, moving on to my second point. My second point is that yes, the Bible has been tampered with, but that doesn't mean that we can't trust it or we should throw it out altogether. That means that we have to read for ourselves and discover what lies or errors have been injected into our book. The majority of lies that people tell on the Bible aren't even actually in the Bible. People just usually tend to repeat things that they heard somebody else say about the Bible, and they didn't even research it or look it up for themselves. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5:21, it says, "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good." So when someone truly studies the Bible, they will see that many of the lies that were actually prophesied to happen in the Bible. For example, I'm going to read from 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 48. It reads, "And laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likenesses of their images." So the book of Maccabees is one of the 14 books in the Apocrypha, which the Roman Catholic Church had taken out of the original 1611 King James Version Bible. Now in this verse, it tells you that the heathen would paint their images in our book. This is why in some Bibles you see images of white or Caucasian people being depicted as the people of the book, when in fact they are not. Also in chapter 14 of the Wisdom of Solomon, it completely explains how Rodrigo Borgia, when he became Pope Alexander VI, he hired Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to create an image of his son, Cesare Borgia, to put up as the image of Jesus Christ in the Western world, which is now called America. All of this was done under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church around the year 1503. Now you should read the whole chapter for yourself to get the full picture, but in verses 15 and 16 it reads this: "For a father afflicted with untimely mourning, when he hath made an image of his child, soon taken away, now honored him as a god, which was then a dead man, and delivered to those that were under him ceremonies and sacrifices. Thus in process of time, an ungodly custom grown strong was kept as law, and graven images were worshipped by the commandments of kings." So the father was Rodrigo Borgia. The child, worshipped as a god, was his son Cesare. And the ungodly customs were all the pagan holidays and traditions that came with the worship of that image. Traditions like Christmas and Easter. Now the Bible also even prophesied what major two religious stumbling blocks that we would be one day caught up in. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64, it reads, "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have even known, even wood and stone." So the wood represents the cross of Tammuz in Christianity, and the stone represents the Kaaba stone in Islam. Now both of these cause people to serve another god, who is actually in opposition to the actual God of the Hebrews. So my point is that by not reading the Bible, you're actually hindering yourself from discovering the truth as to who has lied to you and to what about. The people that altered the Bible didn't really change much. The main things that they changed was the Most High's name and Christ's name. But we can still find the truth of this through much study. And all the other lies can easily be seen through their deception. Now my third point, the supreme belief in science overall is actually another religious trap in itself. First of all, the belief in science is a religion by itself. The majority of things that people believe in science are things that they have not observed or tested for themselves. So they are still choosing to believe in the writings or observations of someone else. How is that any different than someone that chooses to believe in the writings or observations of the Bible? Now, I'm not saying that science is bad. Actually, a lot of science supports many of the stories and claims in the Bible. But there is a lot of scientific theories that try to go against the Bible. But at the end of the day, nothing in the Bible has ever been scientifically proven to be wrong. But on the flip side of that, there have been many things in science that have changed, and there have been many things that claim to be true but actually turned out to be a complete lie, like the existence of other planets and man landing on the moon, for example, are both lies created by science. Now, what does the Bible have to say about science? I'm going to read from 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 20. It reads, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings, and oppositions of science falsely so called. See, we are told to avoid worthless discussions about science. So any science that attempts to teach something that goes against the Bible is a pointless discussion. But it's pointless because eventually it's going to be proven to be wrong. Now, my fourth point, which is my last point, the belief that the African culture predates the Bible in no way, shape, or form makes the Bible wrong or plagiarized. The Bible is merely a collection of writings from scrolls that date back as far as 2000 BC. Then there are also other books that support the Bible, like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Jasher, and the works of Flavius Josephus. These are all books that are just as old, if not older. Now, the oldest African writings are found on pyramids that science suggests date back to as far as 3000 BC. Now, while these dates are debatable, my point is that Hebrew records are just as old. Then, to go even further into that, many ancient stories that are found in Egypt and all throughout Africa, one could actually argue that they were plagiarized or stolen from Hebrew stories. At one time, all people spoke the same language, and the same stories were passed down from generation to generation through word of mouth. I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. It reads, And the whole earth was one language, and of one speech. So it was not until the languages were split that the exact same stories went into different lands, creating their own spin on the same stories. Again, I'm going to read from Genesis 11, verses 7 and 9. It reads, Go to, let us go down there and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build a city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound their language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. Now, in the previous chapter, which is Genesis chapter 10, we get the genealogy of Noah's children. And we see that there are at least 70 different lineages listed. Then it goes on to say in Genesis chapter 10, verse 32, These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations. By these were the nations divided in the earth, after the flood. So if Noah taught his sons the exact same stories about God and creation, there would have been at least 70 different versions of the exact same Hebrew stories being spread all throughout the world after the Tower of Babel. But again, Abraham was the first Hebrew. So all of these stories were actually Hebrew stories that then later got changed. So now the only question is, which of these stories are true? Like I said, the only lineage that kept the laws of the Most High after Noah and Shem was Abraham. It was Abraham who had the knowledge of the Most High and all things that made Egypt a great nation. I'm going to read from the works of Flavius Josephus in Antiquity of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 8, Paragraph 2. It reads, Abram conferred with each of them, and confuting the reasonings they made use of. Every one for their own practices demonstrated that such reasonings were vain and void of truth. Whereupon he was admired by them in those conferences as by wise men, and one of great sagacity. And when he discoursed any subject he undertook, and this is not only as he understandeth, but in persuading other men to also assert to him, he, being Abraham, communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abram came to Egypt, They were unacquainted with those parts of learning. So much of the knowledge and wisdom in Egypt actually came from the Hebrews. Now, what about the name Africa itself? Where did that name even come from? Again, I'm going to read from the works of Flavius Josephus and Antiquity of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 15. It reads this: Abraham, after this, married Keturah, by whom 6 sons were born to him. Now for all these sons and grandsons, Abram contrived to settle them in colonies, and they took possession of Troglodytis and the country of Arabia the Happy, and as far as it reaches to the Red Sea. It is related of this offering that he made war against Libya and took it, and that his grandchildren, when they inhabited it, called it from his name Africa. So we see here that even the name Africa was given its name by Hebrews. It goes on to say this: there were many sons born of Abraham by Keturah. Nay, he names 3 of them, Apher, Sarim, and Japhron. That from Sarim was the name of Assyria denominated, and that from the other 2, Apher and Japhron, the country of Africa took its name. So, what was Africa called before this? We're going to read in Psalms 105 verses 23 through 24. It reads: Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And he increased his people greatly, and made them stronger than their enemies. So before Israel became a great nation, Africa was called the land of Ham. Now, land masses are typically named after people. Everything great about Egypt happened during the Hyksos period. Hyksos actually means shepherd kings. In secular history, the Hyksos were a non-African nation that came into Egypt, ruled for a time, and then disappeared into history. Nowhere in any history can they prove where these people came from or where they went, but it cannot be denied that they did exist and that they did rule. The only historical book that explains who these people are is the Bible. Now, I've already done a video explaining the Hyksos were the Israelites and that they ruled under Joseph. And for more detailed on that, I suggest that you go through my playlist and watch the video Seeking Truth of the Hyksos. Now, with all of that, this explains why there is so much history in Africa and all throughout Egypt. That's because the people of the Bible lived in Egypt and fled into the wilderness, which is called Africa. So now that I've addressed all the major complaints, I'll leave with my final points. The Bible is still the only book that prophesied the specific detailed events that would happen to so-called black people. Now, no other religion, philosophy, or ideology explains why black people are in the condition that we are in, or how to get out of it. But the Bible does. Now, I just want to be clear, Negroes are not the only Israelites. Hispanics and Indians are also Israelites. The so-called black people are the only ones running around claiming to be African when they are not. Africans are descendants of Ham. The Zondervan Bible Dictionary states this about Ham: he became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. So there's only 4 races of African. And the so-called black people in America, the Jamaicans, the Haitians, they don't belong to any of these nations. We are Hebrew Israelites by blood. We are a chosen people. Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 6 reads, For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are on the face of the earth. So it was actually prophesied that Israelites would be scattered all over the earth, and they would forget who they were. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 26 reads, I said I would scatter them into corners. I would make the remembrance of them cease from among men. It was prophesied that the Israelites would lose their heritage and end up serving other nations. Jeremiah chapter 17 verse 4 reads, "And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever." It was prophesied that Israelites would be destroyed because they lost the knowledge of who they were and the laws of their God. Hosea chapter 4 verse 6 reads, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt not be priest to me, seeing that thou hast forgotten the law of thy God. I will also forget thy children." It was prophesied that the Israelites, as a nation of people, would be sold into slavery again with ships. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 68 reads, "And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." Now with all that, it was also prophesied that Israelites would one day begin to wake up and begin to realize that they are not black, they're not African, they're not Muslims, they're not Hispanic, they're not niggers, they're not Indians, but we are Israelites, God's chosen people. Hosea chapter 1 verse 10 reads, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living God." Now, with that being said, I hope that you found this video informative. Please feel free to leave a like or comment at the bottom. And I always encourage people to always do more research on their own. Don't just take my word for it. But no matter what you do, remember to always seek the truth. Thank you again for watching. Shalom.